The fact that Israel cannot invade Lebanon is because the partisan army there is 100 times more powerful than the guerrilla army facing them in Gaza, with weapons that could literally level, flatten all of Israel, all of its cities and its towns, its airports, its factories, and even threaten its nuclear weapons under the ground in Dimona themselves. So they cannot fight Hezbollah. They have failed to defeat. I'm not saying Hamas beat them, but as you know, a guerrilla army wins if it does not lose. A conventional army loses if it does not win. And that's what Israel is now facing on its southern and northern front. Palestine's allies in the Yemen, far away in the Yemen, the poorest country in the world, has the means of delivering missiles on Tel Aviv. The Iraqi resistance has the same means or more. The looming presence of an undefeatable Iran, they're all the time talking. Lindsey Graham's constantly talking about attacking Iran, making war on Iran. Iran could defeat the United States in a war. It could sink every American ship in the Persian Gulf. It could bring the world economy to a complete halt. And of course, it has the means of destroying Israel. And who knows what means, in truth, it has. Israel rests on its supremacy as an illegally acquired and held nuclear weapons country. But what if Iran has nuclear weapons? And why shouldn't it? If Israel has nuclear weapons and is threatening Iran, why shouldn't Iran have nuclear weapons? And maybe it does. Maybe it's already got them. Maybe they're a week or 2 or 5 or 10 weeks away. So the whole balance of power in the region has changed, and no amount of floating aircraft carrier targets in the Eastern Mediterranean is going to change that equation. And of course, we now live in a world where Russia and China have effectively become one country, certainly one power, and Russia and China have proved and could easily prove many times over that they are on the side of the new order, the new multipolar world. And so every way you look at it, every way you dice it, it's over. The sun is rising in the east and setting in the west. And instead of negotiating our decline, we have bet everything on a zero-sum game approach. Instead of going for win-win, we've gone for all or nothing. And I'm afraid we're going to be left in the end with nothing.
Yeah. Yes. And we can zoom in on the United States a bit now that you bring up the regional consequences. Antony Blinken was traveling or traversing the Middle East once again for what seems like the half dozenth of times, traveling to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, everywhere he can go, talking to the Palestinian Authority. The idea of this has been, and this is what the Biden administration has said, is to prevent a regional war, to de-escalate the situation. That has been the framing. But one of the things that's been quite clear is that while the United States has from the very beginning inflamed regional tensions since Israel has gone on its onslaught, it has also expressed, maybe it's disingenuous, but in my estimation, it is a genuine fear that the United States will get pulled in to a conflict that Israel cannot win regionally. It cannot, as you said, if the U.S. can't defeat Iran, if the U.S. cannot take on Hezbollah, what makes us think that Israel can? So with that said, I wanted to just pull up a graphic because you mentioned Yemen, the Red Sea situation. Constantly, the United States has been saying over the last several days that there is no damage being done, that Yemen is not doing any damage, the Houthis aren't doing any damage. But the Financial Times just wrote an article about this situation, and you mentioned Paper Tiger. Here are all of the U.S. forces scattered about West Asia and, of course, Northern Africa. And we're talking about 57,000 personnel, dozens of military installations, and just untold numbers of weapons. What's going on here? Why hasn't the United States been able to stabilize the situation? Why is it that so many people view Israel as being the one in the driver's seat, even though both you and I know that the United States has a lot of leverage when it comes to its relationship with Israel?
Well, Israel is a client state of the United States. And ordinarily, the tail does not wag the dog. But we'll come back to that point. With all of these forces, well, it seems like a decade ago now, but it's only 2 years ago that it's less than 2 years ago, that the United States Army snuck out of Afghanistan like a thief in the night, leaving, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars worth, maybe billions of dollars worth of weapons and equipment to the people they'd just spent 20 years trying to defeat in a war, the Taliban, no less. So it's not hard to believe that the United States can have all this firepower, can have all these men under arms, but still lose to local people, to the natives of the lands that they are occupying. But usually you can see a point. You can say the United States has forces here for that reason. But what is the point of the United States forces in Iraq? Which, I warn American mothers and fathers, is in a Benghazi situation right now. God forbid, but they could wake up one day and that base has been overrun and all the Americans in it killed. The Iraqi parliament has a year ago ordered American forces to leave Iraq. The Iraqi prime minister has just ordered them from the prime minister's office to leave Iraq. And they say they will not leave. Well, what choice does that give the people of Iraq? The parliament wants them out. The prime minister's told them to go. The US says no. Well, what happens next? It's kind of obvious, you know. What is the purpose of the American forces in Syria? In an illegal, isolated, totally surrounded base. That's another Benghazi waiting to happen. And there are many other Benghazis that you could pick out from that graphic that you have just shown. And the point is, it doesn't achieve anything. This projection of American power is showing America's weakness, not its strength. And so I'm asking the American people and the British people as their loyal vassal state to wake up and smell the coffee, to wake up and realize that the world is changed and that no good can come of us pretending that we are still the Roman Empire that can dispatch legions to every part of the world and impose our will. We cannot. And it has been amply proven that we cannot. Now, the point about a client state that gets out of control is the reality we're now facing here. Of course, in the medium term, the United States can impose its will on Israel. A significant number of Israel's citizens are, in fact, American citizens, although many of them have left. All the money and all the weapons that Israel uses come from the United States. So they have what you called leverage. But in the short term, how do you know Netanyahu's not going to pull a Samson act and bring the whole house down on everybody's head? When your client is not a poodle, but a pit bull terrier, you're in danger yourself. That terrier might savage you, might savage your vital interests before you are able to stop them. That's why it is so profoundly unhealthy that your entire political class seems to be a wholly owned subsidiary of the Israel lobby. And that Israel lobby is not, of course, a Jewish lobby. It's a fundamentalist evangelical Christian Zionist lobby, more than it is a Jewish lobby, and a very large and significant part of America's Jewish community is against Netanyahu and for justice in the conflict we are talking about. But when I see senators almost like robots, almost catatonically walking the American people deeper and deeper into this quagmire you described, I wonder when the American people are going to say enough of this, no further. I mean, even the so-called American First Brigade, turns out they're not America First at all. They're Israel First, even if Israel's interests diverge from the interests of the United States. When I see you passing resolutions in your Congress, virtually nem con, virtually unanimously, making it a crime to boycott Israel, making it a crime to stand up for the Palestinians, to wear certain clothes, to chant certain slogans, to hold up certain placards, the egregious scrapping, trashing of your constitutional freedoms and liberties, all in the interests of a small country of 7 million people on the Eastern Mediterranean shores. I mean, America is a great country, a great power, the greatest we've ever seen. Why is it being led by the nose by Benjamin Netanyahu, a man that most people in Israel think should be in jail, never mind being allowed to pull the world into a potentially global catastrophe?
You know, you raised the America Firsters, the resolutions in the United States around anti-Semitism and Zionism. It's notable that on these issues, we see complete lockstep unity between those America Firsters who maybe oppose Ukraine funding, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and also those so-called progressives, quote unquote, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush, etc. They all signed on to the resolution that equates Zionism and anti-Semitism. So I think it's critical to point that out. Now, given this, maybe we can close on the question of Gaza here. Given the situation where it is, intense pressure on Israel, really the United States, I mean, maybe it was always a kind of a Satan sandwich for the U.S. from the very beginning to basically pour everything it could into Israel to have it meet U.S. foreign policy objectives, giving it so much influence in this region, and then being caught in a larger geopolitical picture that the U.S. finds itself in, a failing proxy war in Ukraine, lowering prospects. I think Biden's attempt at a fake rapprochement with China shows that there are dim prospects in Asia. You mentioned Niger and the heroic situation in the west of Africa. Seems like geopolitical prospects for the U.S. are quite dim. And then suddenly on October 7th, when the Palestinian resistance waged this or ignited this recent iteration of the conflict, the U.S., everyone was talking about Israel being caught with its pants down. It seemed like the U.S. was not expecting at all to have to escalate like it has in the Middle East. So, I mean, how does the U.S. adjust to this situation? And what are the implications, do you feel like, for its position in the world?
Well, if I know the things I've just said to you about the possibilities that would occur if a wider war was ignited, and I left school at 15 to go and work in a factory, you can be sure that the Ivy Leaguers in Foggy Bottom also know it. I'm not some oracle here. I'm not imparting to you undiscovered truths. The people who rule us, they already know all of these things and more. They must. So that's why America doesn't want a wider regional war. They're telling the truth about that. Some on the left imagine that they do, but in truth they don't, because they know what the likely outcome of that wider conflagration would be. But they have a client that they have armed to the teeth and sharpened those teeth endlessly, that is no longer under their control. Blinken proves it every time he goes there. Every time he goes there, he tells us that he's told them that there needs to be less civilian casualties, there needs to be more precision, needs to be more care taken, and the numbers of dead and maimed goes up rather than down. So they have ample evidence that their client is not taking their orders. And that, of course, demonstrates their weakness still further, as does their unwillingness, inability to check or stop the growing influence of Iran and the axis of resistance and its fighting abilities and its economic strength. I've just been talking with some Iranian friends online just an hour ago, and the optimism in the air in Iran about their new geopolitical and economic situation is palpable. The failure of the US to destroy Iran is another indicator, marker of their growing weakness. So what's going to happen? This brings me back to the ICJ. When I raised this on my own show, the mother of all talk shows, virtually nobody agreed with me, but I'm iterating it now again. There are many people who need an off-ramp. There are many people who need an exit from this before it becomes uncontrollably dangerous. And wouldn't the ICJ ordering Israel to cease and desist be the perfect off-ramp? Wouldn't it be the perfect excuse to say, look, client, we'd love to, but we can't, because to do so, we'd be in defiance of the highest court in the world on the most sensitive subject in the world, namely genocide. So I've got my fingers crossed. I'm a religious man. I pray to God that this court delivers a verdict that can save Palestinian lives, save Israeli lives, save Lebanese lives and Yemeni lives, and perhaps save all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the fact that the ICJ will not only hear this case, but will be under immense. Some people have been pessimistic and said, oh, well, the ICJ could take years to rule on this. The Western mainstream media, of course, loves to sow the pessimism. They don't really want to see this explode. But at the same time, there were quite a few number of protesters already outside of The Hague, and worldwide, there's so much attention on this. I'm not quite sure if there's ever been a case, definitely not in my lifetime, of an ICJ case receiving this amount of public scrutiny and attention worldwide. So I think, your point is definitely taken. I think sometimes it's hard for especially people just following this, the atrocities, and having understandable pessimism, if not complete and utter distrust in the whole of the collective West, especially the U.S. Leader, the head of it, because politics is can be a bit more sophisticated when there is this much pressure, and you have the United States from the very beginning, maybe doing the opposite of this, but trying to massage Israel's approach to this, knowing how consequential it is to the current U.S. administration. Israel may not care, but it is quite consequential for the current U.S. administration, as well as whoever takes the helm, whether it's Biden or someone else, Trump, whoever. It is quite consequential that this thing continues on, and that the negative attention on the U.S.'s role in it continues. I don't think we've seen this in the modern history, especially in the last couple of decades, when it comes to the Palestine question. It truly has brought it back on the map in ways that I could not have predicted before October 7th. And then I just want to close on this here. On December 14th, Jake Sullivan met with Mr. Gallant, Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, who is probably one of the top, if we talk about those who have uttered many things in relation to genocide on Palestinians in Gaza. But I think this gets to your point about the tail wagging the dog, so to speak. Here you have just Israel out of control. And this was the moment where I recognized that regardless of what the U.S. is saying, Israel is willing to publicly defy the United States' own wishes. Here is what he had to say about the state of the war and how long it might go.
So thank you for being side by side with us in this effort. The Hamas is a terror organization that built itself for a decade to fight Israel. And they build infrastructure under the ground and on the ground. And it is not easy to destroy them. It will take and require a long period of time. It will last more than several months, but we will win and we will destroy them.
It will last several months. This was as the United States was trying to push Israel to not just enter a low intensity phase, but to perhaps extend a longer ceasefire, humanitarian ceasefire, than it had already partially agreed to. So I think that says it all about where things are at.
Danny, there's a wonderful Yiddish word, so many wonderful Yiddish words, chutzpah. That's what was on display there. What we in Scotland would call a brass neck. The arrogance with which the tail wagged the dog there was palpable, was visible on Sullivan's face. And I just want to stress this point. The court can order an immediate cessation. It doesn't have to deal with the whole case on its merits. That can take years, would take years. But it can order a cease and desist tomorrow evening or over the weekend after they have consulted. That wouldn't make Netanyahu stop necessarily, although it might, but it's unlikely that it would. But it would certainly immediately confront the Western governments and the Western leaders with a gigantic, an Everest of a political and legal problem. And that would then begin to put real pressure on Joe Biden and on Netanyahu. Look, we have to wrap this thing up. We are now in such perilous waters, we could end up on trial in our own countries for breaking a genocide convention which we drew up, we wrote, and we signed, and to which we are bound.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.